That shield doesn't belong to you. You don't deserve it. My father made that shield.
Alright, hello everyone, welcome to 2FAST2MOVIE. I am your host, Kenny, and with me is my co-host, Matt Kime. And we will be covering Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and today we are discussing episode 1. So Matt, this is our intro to Falcon and Winter Soldier. What did you think?
I think it was... The funny thing... I actually don't know what I think. I think it's a decent start. I don't know, like with WandaVision, I don't know if there's enough of a hook quite there. If I had a little complaint to make, I think it was a decent first episode. Especially if you're familiar with the movies at this point, because I don't think if you haven't seen any of the movies, you probably shouldn't be watching this. I think it offers an interesting look at the MCU post Endgame. And I think there's some fascinating world building that is being done in this episode. And so I think that's the thing I'm happiest with. I don't know if there's enough of a hook or conflict introduced, but it's only episode 1. And like with WandaVision, what we started out with is quite the journey from how it ended. So,
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. It's good world building and good build up. But I guess the hook comes at the end of the episode. So, but they have TV. But before we begin and dive deep into that, please be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. We upload new videos every week, and our other friends will be covering other shows on 2FAST2MOVIE. So be sure to stay tuned to check that out. And as always, spoilers ahead. You have been warned with everything MCU and this show. So with this episode, it takes place months after the events of Endgame, and we follow Sam and Bucky. They're trying to sort of get back into the world after being blipped out of existence for 5 years, and we follow Sam doing his thing as the Falcon by himself. And after a successful mission, he sort of goes back he goes back home to sort of hand off Cap's shield to DC and sort of go back to a normal life and help his sister with loans and stuff like that. And Bucky tries to recover from his trauma as the Winter Soldier, trying to make amends for past sins. And towards the end, the government decides that the country needs a new hero, a new symbol, so they decide to recast Captain America, or whatever, and we're introduced to John Walker for a brief moment. So where do we start? I guess we can... For me, I feel like the more interesting... the more interesting storyline for me personally was Bucky's sort of arc in this episode. Would you agree with that?
initially, yeah. There's a lot there with Bucky. It almost reminds me of the Bourne Identity movies where it's an amnesiac assassin who's finding out that he's responsible for all these horrible things. And so there's a scene in one of the Bourne movies where he goes and finds somebody he had hurt in his past life and essentially tries to make amends. And so that reminded me quite a bit of what we're seeing with Bucky. He's almost following, I don't want to call it like a 12-step process, but it's certainly evocative of that whole idea where he's going to therapy, he's meeting up with people to make amends, although his version of making amends is catching bad guys.
Not hurting anybody.
And dealing with the world's worst therapist.
My sister. I'm not saying my sister's a professional, but she is studying to become an expert in the field. And the whole time I was watching with her, she was like, this is unethical and illegal. But also she mentioned the therapist in the episode, she mentioned that she was a soldier too. I don't know the logistics of that, but yeah, it's probably the. I kind of hate this trope of having terrible therapists for like mentally ill protagonists.
Was it intentionally supposed to be bad, or is it just like the portrayal coming across way worse than the intent?
I guess like they were trying to portray tough love from a therapist because like that happens, but I don't know. I can't say. I really don't know what the intent is. I feel like the intent is that Bucky is closed off, and he's. I mean, like the whole scene. It does, fall on Bucky to open up, and the whole time he's not. She's just so frustrated. But at the same time, like if you're frustrated as a therapist, you don't do the whole passive aggressive thing. That's not how you open up your patients. You know. But again, I'm not. I'm not a professional. A disclaimer. I'm not an expert in the field. I'm an artist.
I think the implication is that they had been going round and round for a long time, and the therapist is just getting to the end of her rope with him. I think that's the idea they're trying to show. But I don't know.
Yeah, but I guess it does sort of parallel Steve a little bit with because like Steve, Bucky is a man out of time, right? But for Steve, like his journey, I'd say, is definitely easier because he doesn't have to hide, and also he's literally the country's golden boy, their hero. So when he's back, he's sort of welcomed with open arms. Bucky, he's on the opposite end of the spectrum. He's an assassin, but he wasn't in control of his actions, and so he sort of put back in the world. He was excused for all of his crimes, so that's interesting. And he's sort of trying to exist in this new world, but also trying to deal with his past. Where Steve is trying to let go of the good times, Bucky's trying to let go of the bad times.
I think that's an interesting idea, like the contrast between their different experiences, because, I mean, Bucky, for the most part, like, he was alive and operating during the interim time, but it's, like, because he was a sleeper agent, he wasn't, like, conscious for most of it, you could argue. Yeah. And so he's missed just as much time as Steve has. So seeing, like, there's, like, a line of dialogue where he's talking about dating apps and how memes just, like, confuse him.
Yeah.
I got a kick out of that moment where he's talking about, like, the tiger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They did some of that with, like, Steve in the very beginning with, like, the first Avengers movie and stuff. Just, like, like, oh, what's the internet? And stuff like that. And I'm sure they're going to do a lot of that with Bucky. And yeah, I'm really liking what I'm seeing with Bucky, and because we never really had time to breathe with Bucky in the movies. He's just sort of there, and with very little personality.
I honestly agree with that, because I was just doing the Return of the Movie podcast covering the Avengers series, and that's one of the things that struck out about me is that for most of Winter Soldier, he's still active as Winter Soldier, and then during Civil War, he is just on the run for the most part, and you never really spend, like, everything you see of Bucky is through Steve's point of view, so you never really, and Sam for that matter too. You don't really see too much into the inner thoughts and inner lives of either character, because the next time you see him, he's just kind of hanging out in Wakanda. But even then, you see him through the point of view. The scene is shot from the point of view of T'Challa and company. So it's an interesting look at a character who, like, has been a little, I don't want to say underutilized because those movies were so big, but it's like a character that the other movies just didn't have time to delve further in with, like with Wanda.
Yeah, because there's, like, so many characters, and, like, they look interesting, but, like, we just didn't have enough time with them because you can only do so much with, like, an Avengers movie, and like Sam as well. I was surprised that he mentioned like your nephews and like family and stuff like, and it just sort of makes me realize, it's like, oh yeah, like we kind of know Sam, but like we don't know his family life. We don't know like what he's sort of dealing with at home or whatever. And I'm sort of liking what I'm seeing with Sam, where Sam and Bucky are like sort of contrasting each other, where like Sam is trying to live up to Cap's legacy and why why he's going home and just like trying his best to fix his wrongs and stuff like that, and it feels like Sam's arc is like, am I good enough, and
Yeah, that definitely feels like that's what the whole through line is for Sam. Is just living up to the legacy, because the last time we see him in Endgame, he's being handed the shield and told to keep it. And the first time, the first major decision he makes in this show is to donate the shield over to the Smithsonian to try and preserve Steve's legacy, because in his mind he is either not worthy, not able to live up to it, or just thinks the legacy would be better preserved in a museum than him embodying it. And so I think that's going to be like the huge thematic through line for a lot of this show, especially as far as Sam's concerned. The other thing I like is, once again, we're seeing Bucky's personal life, we're seeing Sam's personal life, because every time you see him in these movies, he's either on the run, being snapped out of existence, or you just, once again, you see him through somebody else's point of view. Because he and Bucky were very much important side characters, but side characters nonetheless. So seeing his family, seeing him struggle to support his sister, and there's like a little bit of resentment there that she had to carry on a family business while he was just either gone or fighting with the Avengers for all this time. It's interesting that we're talking about the man out of time idea, because for everybody that's coming back from the snap, they're all out of time in some fashion, even if it's only something like smaller-ish, like 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years still makes quite a difference, especially when everybody thinks you're dead, and then all of a sudden you're back. But also, I do like the we sort of like more world building with the whole blip, and sort of again dealing with the repercussions of the blip and sort of the financials side of it, with the whole
he can't get a loan
at the bank. yeah, the guy saves the world, but he can't get a loan. That's the government for
that's I'd imagine that's like a shocking, that would be a really, really common situation in that universe, just because of the way that the currency system is set up. And you have how many, let's say that the population is 8 billion people by the time that Thanos snaps people out of existence, or 7 or something like that. You have at least 3.5 billion people coming back into existence out of nowhere. And that would understandably stress whatever recoveries to the system that they were able to make in the interim time. But it's also very much the I think there's also a a soldier coming home from war kind of subtext, where he goes out and fights, and he does die if you count the snap as dying. For not necessarily his country per se, but it's still kind of world, that idea. He's sacrificing himself for the greater good, and he comes back, and people want to take pictures with him. People say thank you for your service, and he can't get a loan.
Yeah, I don't know if that's like a sort of metatextual.
I don't know if it is or it isn't, but that's a common. It's a common in a lot of like war movies, especially that deal with like the Vietnam War. It's a common idea where like Rambo, before he became this big commie killing badass, he was just like, the first Rambo movie is him being mistreated by the police department. Like that's the plot of First Blood. And so it's a common idea, and the whole idea of homeless veterans, and it's not a right, and like the way that like all the scandals that have happened with the VA. I don't really want to get too deep into that rabbit hole, but it is common theme in pop culture and in the real world, to where I can't help but wonder if they're playing on that trope a little bit.
Yeah, with what we're going through the arcs with Bucky and Sam, it's definitely the soldier coming home. Like now that the Infinity War is over, the battle is done. What now? Do we wait for another war to come, or do we try to sort of get back into normal lives, whatever that was, before before these fantastic things that happened to us, or I'm using air quotes.
Because the most mundane, because the big conflict for Bucky happens when he gets pressured into going on that date, and the date is like, she's like really patient with him because he's not opening up at all, and he just walks out on her.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that I forget the older man's name. But he was. It looked like he was on that list.
He was.
Or like the son that was killed off in a war or something like that.
Yeah. There was a scene where we flash back to. It was a nightmare of Bucky where it was overseas somewhere like Russia or something, I think. And this guy, he was just sort of in the wrong place at the wrong
that
time.
was supposed to have been the son. Oh,
yeah,
okay. I gotta be honest, like, the funny thing is the episode makes it clear, and I guess it just went over my head.
Yeah. Hey, no, it happens. No, that flashback, that was his son. And the whole time, he was, that's why, like, when the father, he was just like, my son, loved this thing. And he went overseas, and he died for some reason. I don't know what happened. And Bucky was just tense the whole time. Like, he's... like in the beginning with the therapist, he was trying to make amends for past sins, like narking on the senator in the car, just like oh hey, I'm just trying.
And then driving it around like an RC.
Yeah, and just hey, I'm just trying to make amends. Good luck in prison, and it goes from stuff like that where it's easier for him because he's sort of like tearing down bad people that he put there, but now the harder bit is just him making things right with people that he wronged, people that he killed, and like it definitely calls back to Civil War where he killed Tony's parents, and we didn't get to see. Like, we saw Steve's reaction and Tony's reaction to all that, clearly. But we never get too much of, what Bucky was feeling, aside from a few throwaway lines.
I think there's one line where he asks Steve, "Are you sure that I'm worth all of this trouble?"
Yeah.
And that kind of is the only indication of how he feels about all of that. But I think based on all of this, the arc we're going to see for him is his journey to trying to forgive himself, basically.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's, and I'm really excited about it because we, like, Bucky is is an interesting character, but we just never dug in too deep with him in the Captain America movies from Winter Soldier on, because it's just more or less Steve fighting for Bucky, and now we sort of get to see let the character breathe and actually just go on this journey with him, and this show is about legacy, and I think that's what these shows are doing, just sort of legacy stories of the Avengers movies are these big about these big superheroes, and these shows kind of have that space in between the movies. Because one of my biggest issues with the MCU was that we never got to see how we got from point A to point B in terms of going from one movie to the next. Like in Civil War, the Avengers are broken up, and and then when we get to Infinity War, the Avengers are on the run, and also Wanda and Vision are together now. We didn't see any of that. And
Yeah, that was one thing that stuck out for me. Sorry to jump on you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
That was one thing that jumped out about me with the movies, is that not only is there a lot of like status quo resetting happening between the movies, is that the conflicts are always so. And I think this is personally because lately I've been feeling a little bit burned out by just watching one superhero movie or piece of content after another, despite the fact that I'm very clearly a big fan of the genre. I read tons of comic books. Is that the stakes are always so earth-shatteringly high to where when it's just the world getting blown up or something like, or a city getting destroyed or a bomb going off, the stakes are almost so impossibly high all of the time to where they just you almost start to become numb to it a little bit, and it's just you don't not necessarily stop believing in the situations, but they just become a little bit more mundane just because of the repetition of it. And so one thing I really appreciate about this show, the more I think about it, and what WandaVision was able to do, despite the fact that I'm of the opinion that it stumbled a little bit along the way, is that the conflicts are way more personal, way closer to home, while still retaining a greater sense of import within the context of the Marvel universe. And so that's a balance that sometimes these shows, even being limited series, are able to hit that the movies, because they're about a million different characters fighting Thanos or whatever, aren't always able to touch on, or at least if they do touch on, it's not as deep. Because the Avengers movies, for the most part, like they, Tony Stark and Steve Rogers had really, really good character arcs, I think, but most everybody else had their arcs saved for movies or shows.
Yeah, definitely. The Avengers movies were definitely like, the big comic book splash page events, and these shows definitely give a chance for like those supporting characters room to breathe and just flesh out their characters, and I love that, and I'm really excited about that.
I'm excited to see what they do with Sharon Carter, because she wasn't in this episode, but she's supposed to be in this show. And she was such a big part of Winter Soldier and Civil War, and I don't think we've seen her since.
We have not, no. I honestly don't know where she is in the world, really. But, hey, maybe she was, in the blip, and then now she's back like the rest of them. Or maybe she was around dealing with the whole thing. And maybe there'll be a good contrast between, Sam, Bucky, and someone else who was sort of around. But
speaking of someone who's around, where is Steve?
So from what I can understand, Steve, at the end of Endgame, spoilers. Steve time traveled to his past. And spent time with Haley Atwell's character, and now he's sort of quietly retired. And I guess the public doesn't know that, and so I'm guessing Steve is sort of living off in a cabin somewhere, or quietly retiring, and just sort of, I'm betting there's rumors that Chris Evans is coming back as Cap. Not confirmed at all, but that's sort of the rumor that's sort of circling around the internet.
Deadline, which is a very, very credible source of information, reported it, but apparently according to Screen Rant, Kevin Feige came out and said no, that's not happening. So it's I don't know that I'd put it past Marvel to just blatantly lie about it just to preserve the surprise, because we saw it happen with The Mandalorian this past year,
I have not watched Mandalorian yet, but that was ruined for me, so don't worry about it.
I'm sorry. Well, it's not they were misleading about a couple of things that happened in the season, so I'm just leaving it at that. It could. My point being is that they Kevin Feige and Chris Evans and people can say no, but it could very easily they're just saying no to preserve a surprise. So I personally, thematically, I would rather see old Steve as opposed to young
Absolutely.
Steve. I don't
Yeah.
like. I think that the character arc was great where it left off, and you've told the story that you wanted to tell. I don't know that bringing him back would be a cool moment, but I don't know that in the long run for the thematic story you're telling, I don't know that it would help anything.
Yeah, if what they mean by bringing Chris Evans back, I could see, like in the comics, there was like a period where Steve Rogers, got like the super soldier juice out of him, and he's sort of an old guy. So I can see him like being like the old sage character, type
Yeah.
type character. I would love to see that instead of like him being young again.
The man earned his-
I wouldn't want to see that.
The man earned his happy ending. That's all I'm
Oh
saying.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let him rest. Let him rest. But if he has to come back, like in that, or maybe like a prequel. And now that we have rights to the X-Men, like we flash back to. I honestly, this is a good for like an episode of TV, not a whole movie, but like a war movie with Captain America and Wolverine. I've always wanted to see that. But
Dude, I'm here for it. I'm so here for that.
I'd pay money to see that.
Speaking of Cap, there is a new Captain America on the block.
Yeah, and the memes are circling around already. Yeah, it's this guy is John Walker, and in the comics it's U.S. Agent. That's the name he.
So about as generic as a name you could get.
Yeah, I mean, hey, Silver Age of comics, they weren't very creative, honestly. But yeah, so this guy, he's supposed to be like, sort of the reverse of Steve Rogers, like same idea, like patriotism, but like sort of on the opposite end of the optimistic side. So I guess there's sort of meta commentary on what patriotism means.
So like the fervent, over the top, nationalistic side of it.
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do with the character. I mean, like probably as like sort of the bad side of Steve Rogers' legacy, because he sort of leaves a hole in the world where like there needs to be a Captain America now for some reason, because there's the Avengers. And but we know that in the comics, Bucky and Sam have taken up the mantle as Captain America at one point or another, and I think maybe this show is trying to lead down like maybe one of them becoming Captain America at the end, or taking up the shield at least. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, that definitely feels like where this is going. Especially, I think Bucky's journey is going to be a little bit more self-actualization based and less putting on another costume. And I think because Sam was the one that Steve literally tells Sam at the end of Endgame, "It's yours."
Yeah.
So it's definitely feels like we're going to circle around back to that, where Sam feels worthy of the mantle and understanding what the responsibility of being Captain America entails.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if they're going to do a whole costume change, but I wouldn't be mad if Sam is
or if he's
the
just
Captain
flying around
America.
with the shield.
Yeah, hey, I'm totally okay either way, as long as he, as long as he, sort of accepts the shield, or maybe he shares the shield with Bucky, maybe.
But I think where this is going, if I had to guess, is that they're gonna have to fight over the legacy, and ultimately, in some way, shape, or form, realize that the best way to carry on the legacy is to do it themselves.
Yep. Or or you're gonna spend the rest of the season going, "I'm Dad's favorite," But yeah, I guess we can start, wrapping things up. So, Matt, overall, did you enjoy this episode? Are you hooked on for the rest of the season?
Yeah,
Like you have a choice?
Well, yeah. I don't know that I would like. Yeah, I definitely think it's an interesting premise. I don't know that it would appeal to me had I not already seen every single piece of Marvel content for the MCU leading up to this. but I think it's a nice expansion of some likable characters who were not used as much in the movies. Because, like, Sam's in, like, Ultron for, like, 2 seconds, I think, for, like, 2 scenes.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
so it's like, even in some of the mainline Avengers movies where the characters have been already established into the movies, they're just not there very much. And so it's a nice opportunity to tell stories with characters that you haven't more or left on the sidelines for in a lot of cases. I do kind of have a bit of a reservation with this show because it's like, did you ever see El Camino?
Oh, yes.
The
yes, I did.
Breaking Bad scene. I wonder if it's going to have a little bit of that to it where it's like, it doesn't, because like the whole idea, El Camino was wonderful, and if you like Breaking Bad, you'll like it. That's my disclaimer. However, it doesn't really expand on anything we don't already know. It just kind of takes a more circuitous route to get to the same ending for certain characters. And so, like, the last time, so, like, what I'm getting at is the last time we see Bucky and Sam together, they're together. Sam's been handed the mantle of Captain America, and I don't know that we need to see several hours of TV to expand on that point when Endgame did it in one scene. So I guess what I would like to see is them to do more than just that, even though that is where the show has to end.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if we're just going through, how many episodes is it? 6?
6.
Just to go back to the point where we were at with Endgame, I don't know that there's too much of a point to watching, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Having said that, I enjoyed the first episode.
Yeah. I think, for me, I'm always a slut for characters, and just sort of delving into it. So for me personally, it's not the destination, it's the journey, as cheesy as it is. We can easily predict where this will end because it's a superhero show and it's Marvel. But spending time with the characters and actually seeing them seeing them progress and seeing every step instead of just seeing one scene where it's just like, hey, it's yours now. Oh, I don't know, man, but thanks, but instead of having that, but actually taking our time with these characters and getting to know them, I'm actually looking forward to. At first when I watched this episode, I walked away and I texted you. I was like, man, I'm kind of underwhelmed. I don't know, but sitting here talking to you, and the more I think about it, I'm like, okay, you know what? I'll give it a chance. If we get more of this more personal stakes character stuff, I'm totally down for it. Even though I think the stakes are going to rise because we're dealing with the Hand from the Ninja Turtles. Still don't know much about them, but hey, we'll just have to wait and see next week about what kind of villains these are. Thanos-ists, as you coined, right, Matt?
The Thanos-ists. Yeah, we didn't even talk about them. We could talk about them next week.
We'll talk about them next week because there's really not much to go off of. But thank you guys for tuning in as always. You can find us on YouTube, and we'll be covering the Snyder Cut very soon. So be sure to check that out. We're gonna have a lot of fun with that, right, Matt?
Actually, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, guys, thank you for watching. And as always, it's 2FAST2MOVIE.